Indiana 2016, which is a bicentennial initiative of Earth Charter Indiana, a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to improve and celebrate the state of Indiana and its sustainability. So, as you may know, we are somewhat in an experimental phase here of working with webinars. We believe that there is information that people are looking for across Indiana because many of us are concerned about our state. We love Indiana. We want it to be beautiful, natural, and healthy for generations to come. And so that's why we are doing this. And so for all of you who have tuned in tonight to find out more about Indiana's natural landscape, that is native grasses and wildflowers, welcome to this webinar. And I trust that you are going to have a good time, learn something. The way we will operate tonight is as follows. We have 3 speakers. Each of them comes from a very special place. Each of them is highly qualified to speak on the topic, and we are grateful that they have agreed to do so. Each speaker will take about 10 minutes to open the topic from his or her perspective. And then while they are speaking, you are encouraged to ask questions using the chat box on the right side of your screen if you are in front of a television monitor.
Computer monitor.
What's that?
Computer monitor.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the computer monitor. Then Kathy Sipple will sort through those questions, try to consolidate the ones that are very similar, and she will pose them to the speaker upon request, and then we'll just have something of a dialogue here among the speakers, myself and Kathy, and there may be time at the end for those of you who are on telephone to ask a question that way as well. So we're going to get started now. I think those of you who were here a minute ago heard Kathy telling about the technical problems that we're having with a couple of our speakers getting hooked up here. So hopefully that will be resolved by the time we get to them. We're going to start tonight with Dr. Paul Rothrock. He is the director of the Master of Environmental Science program at Taylor University and has been at that university since 1981. Areas of expertise are plant taxonomy and ecology. He is the author of papers on sedges, including a book on sedges of Indiana. Maybe you don't know what sedges are. I have to confess I had to look it up. These are grasses with solid stems, and Paul may want to explain more of that when he gets online. Anyway, Paul has led the development of the Floristic Quality Assessment database for Indiana and researched performance and effectiveness of plant community assessment methodologies. He has studied plant diversity of a variety of natural areas, including Mound State Park. And he is the past president of the Indiana Academy of Science. Paul, we welcome you to the call tonight, and we are eagerly awaiting to hear your perspective on our topic, which is Indiana's natural landscape, native grasses and wildflowers.
Well, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight. I was sent, by the way, sort of 5 question areas to speak to, and so I'll try to briefly touch each of those and hopefully keep it within that about 10-minute time frame that you've set out for us. But the first point that you wanted us to consider was, why care about native plants? Kind of what is their role? And in a sense, I think you're asking, are they irreplaceable, and do they have, maybe at some level, do they even have economic value? In answering that question, I'd like to start just a little bit with the place that I'm working at, and that's Taylor University, and comment that that's an evangelical Christian college. And so with my students, I'm very much, I think, able to bring to bear on that question certain kinds of ethical arguments that grow out of things that are in the Bible, such as the Psalm 24, which says, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof." And so it's that sense of us being dependent upon what God has made, and we have responsibilities towards it. There's a stewardship role, and that God has given us this very abundant world full of plentiful species and a very complicated interwoven fabric that we still are barely beginning to appreciate. Now, though I'm a scientist as well, and so in that context, we prefer to talk about the nature in different terms, and that is in terms of things like ecosystem services, or there being certain kinds of natural capital. And here we're talking about things like processes of soil formation, erosion control, and water purification, pollination, pest regulation, and things of that type. And the problem with this area of study is we've yet to really adequately value them, both as a discipline, but also we don't value them properly as a society. We're used to getting them for free, but they're just there, something that's around us, and we don't consider where they've come from and really what it would cost to replace them as they deteriorate or as they degrade. And I would argue that really all of those natural services that I was just briefly mentioning, things like erosion control and water purification, pollination, etc., arguably those are better done by the natural vegetation that we still have persisting in Indiana, and those are services that really become irreplaceable. We'll talk a little bit later about maybe how pollinators fit into that picture. I'd also would like to put this question of native plants into a little bit of a context for Indiana as a farm state, and that's to realize that we're moving from historically small farms to ever larger farms. And as we do that, in spite of the best efforts of our farming community to think about conservation measures, just by virtue of going from small to large, that starts to have a tremendous impact upon the diversity of the little things that we depend upon. There's a study out of Sweden which indicates that when you have farms that are, say, a quarter section in size and compare that with a larger farm, there are twice as many bird species in those farms, more butterflies, more herbaceous plant species, 5 times more bumblebee species, and all of these are providing certain services to us that we take for granted. So in our farm context, the little farm does have a lot more to offer because of its native plant content. The second area you wanted me to touch on, I think, was that of climate change and how that might be affecting the native plants of the state. And this has to do with that long-term sustainability question of kind of what our actions are doing relative to nature. And I would have to note that nature, plants, are already responding to climate change. We're seeing changes in plant distributions. Plants are already migrating northward. There's a study this year that was documenting the movement of our temperate zone trees northward into the boreal forests areas of Canada. So that kind of movement of plants is already evident. We've seen the changes in the timing of events within plant life, where bloom periods are moving earlier, bud break is happening earlier, and a study of about 1,600 species of plants and animals indicated over half of those were already changing their timing of events. That study suggested that they're moving ahead at a rate of 2.3 days per decade. So there is this shift in when life events occur within plant and animal species. We can have longer-term records of some things, such as cherry blossoms in Japan, where we have records in that culture going all the way back to the 15th century. And there was a lot of variation in when cherries would bloom in Japan over those centuries. But in the 20th century, it has been steadily increasing, especially since 1950s. So there is this ongoing change in timing of events. And the question then is whether or not that change in timing of a plant or other organism's activity puts it out of sync with those organisms that depend upon it. And there are some signs that is going to be a problem for natural systems going forward. Here in Indiana, I think as plants change in response to climate, it will have an impact on how we manage our forests, and it will have an impact, or is already having an impact on our nature preserve community as they think about how to plan for changes in climate as you protect organisms in one place and climate changes, that you have enough diversity of topography, enough diversity of sites that those organisms can still find refuge in spite of those changes of climate. It seemed like the third question you wanted me to address was what about our roadsides here in Indiana, how they're managed, and the role for those as a place to have wild grasses and wildflowers. I would just frame this very quickly with a publication that was put out by Xerces, which is a wildlife protection or conservation organization whose focus is the little things, the invertebrates, butterflies, insects, bees, and the like. And they have a very nice publication that I think hits a few of these points very well. The first point I thought was very interesting, just to envision how much land, public land, we have on our roadsides here in the United States. They gave a figure of 10 million acres of land. And certainly in Indiana, I think that would represent our largest slice of public land that is available to us. And these are linear corridors. These are linear refuges for plants and animals. So they connect together the remnant woodlots that we have across this farmland part of the state. They do provide important sites for pollinators to multiply, to have their sites for nests and for multiplication. And realizing that a large number of cultivated crops, my numbers say 80-some of the 120-some major crops are insect pollinated. And so we need to have the native pollinators to do this task. One crop that's particularly noted for this would be the forage plant of alfalfa, where you have to have pollinators to do the job of pollinating that. I would also my comment that because of shortages of natural pollinators, farmers would actually rent beehives that are moved around from place to place. And currently we're struggling with what's happening to those hives with the sudden death of hive syndrome. So the natural pollinators are not enough to fill in the breach. We've taken away enough of the habitat for them that we have to use these artificial means. We can talk more about the other benefits of native vegetation in the roadside and other consequences of that. I'm hoping one of the other speakers will amplify that a little bit further for us. The fourth area that I was asked to consider briefly is the use of native plants in the home and institution landscape. And I guess I'd have to admit that I'm something of an advocate for getting rid of lawns. I know that's not very Hoosier of me, but I think the sense that I have is that we just have gone too far in that direction. The one statistic that to me stands out is that here in the United States we have enough lawn area to cover the state of New York. And I think that we could do better than that. We can find ways to be more imaginative about how we do landscaping around our homes and our corporate campuses of one sort or another. There are some very familiar arguments as to why they have so much lawn. They use our groundwater. They're very energy intensive. There's chemical runoff from these lawns that do affect waterways. And if we replace them with native plants, again, the general arguments are that the native plants are better adapted to our local conditions. They may take less maintenance and less fertilizer. And quite frankly, they are diverse and beautiful if you think about ways to change how you do your landscaping. The several very obvious features that are being talked about these days are things like the rain gardens, where you really can have a circumscribed area that is kind of my neatness line. If I can say that again, you have a well-circumscribed area with a neatness line where you mow, but then you have a patch of native plants, and these are being used in suburban and urban areas as a way of absorbing rainwater that's coming off of rooftops. But it seems like everyone who has a little bit of property could find a small area for that kind of beginnings of using a native plant. Here on our own Taylor University property campus, we are beginning this idea of using rain garden and unmowed areas as a way of making our campus more sustainable. And it does take an education. We have to get used to a little different aesthetic. We have to get used to the idea that everything isn't exactly as mowed and neat as we're used to, but there's another kind of beauty there to be enjoyed. I would also, in thinking about the role of native plants around your home and your corporate landscapes, recommend a book by Doug Tallamy. He's very a popular author with those of us with the Indiana Native Plants and Wildflowers Society. And Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home, is a very arresting argument for native plants. And he's supporting those arguments with scientific data, saying it's really an important thing in terms of the long-term sustainability and diversity of organisms across the country. Last point I was asked to touch on was that of whether INPAWS, the Indiana Native Plant and Wildflower Society, has what's our advocacy position? Are there things that we support as I would have understood the question as a political advocacy, and I would at that point say no, we're not that kind of an organization, but we do have advocacies of a different kind. We do support community projects, student research projects, and certainly we would encourage everyone to do their part in supporting organizations such as your local and national land trusts, organizations that are trying to preserve the green spaces here in Indiana. A few that I just quickly could recommend. I'm very much familiar with Acres Land Trust in the northeastern corner of the state. Redtail Conservancy, closer at home here around the Marion and Muncie region. There's a Sycamore Land Trust down towards Monroe and Brown County. Of course, we have a statewide chapter of the Nature Conservancy. I would also recommend the environmental license plate. Those monies are being matched by state funds to help us actually take purchase of these conservation lands or the conservation easements. I would certainly recommend cheering on the recent the actions by our former Governor Daniels and setting up conservation programs along the western part of the state, things that deal with the area around the Wabash River and Sugar Creek. They should be praised for that, and I think it's important for us to laud them loudly when they do those kinds of things that we're interested in. And frankly, the final thing I would say that we advocate is trying to get young people outside and try to overcome this problem of nature deficit disorder. I think it's rampant among our young, and probably even beyond that. But that's my summary anyway, and I hope I've touched a few things that have garnered some questions from our listeners.
Thank you, Paul, and I hope you'll stand by for those questions that as we finish up our presentations. I'm going to ask Kathy now if she's online and if our other speakers have been able to get connected.
Okay. You know what? I've not had a chance to recheck audio, but both are showing as on. So, Tacey, are you able to have audio yet? And how about Bill? Okay. Bill shows up with a microphone, but he had emailed me and said he keeps not being able to join for some reason. So he is with us. I think both of these people have tried diligently to join, but are just unfortunately having some technical difficulties.
Well, let's do this then. Let me read the bio for Tacey. Did you say that you had some written comments from her that you'd received earlier that you might read on her behalf, Kathy?
Well, she had previously said that she would send chat. And Tacey, if you're still here and you can respond via chat, could you please acknowledge? I know she has been trying diligently to sign off and sign on and try to find a mic system that's working for her. So okay. My apologies. I think we're doing this more or less in the same way that we've always done, and it's just configurations and experimentation. Sometimes it just doesn't quite exactly work. So.
All right. Well, Paul has opened up this topic, I think, very superbly for us all. Let me just read Tacey Fletcher's bio, and if she can hear what we're saying, maybe she could enter some questions or some comments or some facts in the chat box, and we could communicate that way. And if not, we will just be the poorer for not hearing from her. But let me read. Tacey is spelled T-A-C-Y. She is a volunteer extraordinaire with the Porter County Wildlife Advisory Board, and specifically at the Zona Wildlife Sanctuary. Fletcher's employment in the field of restoration, ecology, and field conservation, as well as her schooling at Indiana University Northwest, has prepped her for volunteering and physical work at the sanctuary that includes trailblazing, trail maintenance, and invasive plant identification and removal. In the years past, she has led over 200 volunteers in a large-scale invasive garlic mustard pole event at the Paul C. Zona Sanctuary that utilizes local college students. Her future goals of finishing her master's degree in nonprofit management will no doubt take her to a nature preserve or visitor center at a worthy park system. Mrs. Fletcher is finishing her third season as a national park guide with the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore as a nature interpreter. She is pleased to offer her input, whether creative or arduous, with important organizations that support native plant life and at-risk wildlife, such as the Save the Dunes Council and Hoosier chapter of the Sierra Club. the National Wildlife Federation, the Nature Conservancy, and as a board member and publicity chair for the North chapter of INPAWS. Now I'm going to ask one more time if by chance Tacey has been able to connect with us, and if so, we'd like to hear more from her, and if not, we will do our best to take the next step.
Unfortunately, John, I do not see her among our attendees nor the staff calling in. So I've sent her messages via chat, and that might just not work. I know she absolutely wanted to be here. And I will say, you know, I know this is a poor consolation prize, but I would be happy to post the summary, you know, and the recorded audio of this program, and I would be happy to append a previous podcast interview that I did with Tacey, where she really shares her passions about her involvement with INPAWS, and talks a little bit about their work throughout the state on wildflower identification and the hikes that they lead and all other different kinds of things. So it's not quite as good as having it here today live, but considering the circumstances, that's the best idea I can come up with in a pinch. I was the one who recommended Tacey as a speaker. I have personally interviewed her on my own podcast, and she is just great. I know she would love to be here, and I'm sure she's very frustrated. So.
Okay, well, thank you, and I think that would be appreciated by all of us, Kathy, if you could include that podcast.
I would be happy to.
Recording some way when you send it out. I might say that even reading this bio, I am aware of the fact that she has some concerns for invasive species. I know that Bill Fielding, who was also, and maybe will still be on our broadcast, has similar concerns. I think this is one of the issues that many of us wonder about, and wonder whether we are getting ahead or falling behind or just what's happening. And let's see if we have another speaker on the topic, and if not, Paul, we'll ask you if you could speak briefly later on to that question about invasive species.
Sure. What
is the challenge there? How big is the challenge? And are we making headway on it? Okay, let's then, Bill Fielding, have you possibly come online?
I'm awfully sorry. He is showing up as well with a microphone present. He sent me a series of emails saying that he's tried to connect via phone and mic and has not been successful thus far. So Bill, if that's different, if you could acknowledge that in the chat window or just announce yourself, that would be great. Otherwise, I think we need to move to Plan B. Okay, I've got to assume that he's still having audio trouble. So,
all right, let me just say a word about Bill Fielding. He is the Roadside Services Coordinator, and you will remember that Paul talked about how important these roadsides are and how many acres they span across the country and also across Indiana. So Bill Fielding's responsibility here is enormous. He's the Roadside Services Coordinator for the Indiana Department of Transportation. He is the statewide coordinator for Adopt a Highway, which has to do with mowing and herbicide policy and applications, and the Hoosier Roadside Heritage Program. I'd like to hear more about that someday, because that sounds very interesting. There's a few other things that he's involved in. I want to just read them quickly. He is INDot. Of course, that is the Indiana Department of Transportation. He is INDOT's representative to the Indiana Invasive Species Council, INDOT's representative for Southern Indiana Cooperative Weed Management Area. That's about a third of Southern Indiana. The management of Quality Purchase Agreement for all roadside materials. that has to do with erosion control, herbicide, grass seed, and forbs. He is INDot's hardwood forest program in coordination with the Department of Natural Resources. He is a project manager for Advisory Committee for Joint Transportation Research Project with Purdue University. And he's the coordinator and educator for continuing credit hours for pesticide application license holders. I think you can see that Bill is in an important position. I think it's a very heavy responsibility, and I know from talking to him on the telephone, there are very big challenges there that he wrestles with every day. So Bill, hoping you're listening in and receive our appreciation for what you do, and if there's any way for you to consolidate a few remarks and maybe send them to Kathy, we can include them on the report that she is going to circulate to all of us and make available to others who aren't on the call even that want to access this information. In the meantime, we're going to go back to Paul and ask him to speak a little bit about invasive species. And
John, I do have a question or a comment from one of the attendees. Would this be an appropriate time to allow that? It's from Jane Santucci, and she wanted to make us aware of another program, a land conservancy.
All right. Well, why don't you raise that question, and then we'll ask Paul to speak on both of these things.
Okay. And let me just get Jane on. Jane, do you have audio? Jane Santucci, you had a question. I'm wondering if you would like to just share it verbally.
I know, right?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Jane. All right. Well, we've obviously got an echo going here. If we can come back to Jane later. Paul, are you still connected, and could you speak a little bit to invasive species, please?
Yes, how big a challenge and making headway, and maybe just first a comment or two about the problem that invasives represent. Because I don't have at the top of my head a dollar value. I just know it's immense in terms of our efforts to try to control the impacts of non-native plants as they go where we don't want them to go. But I'm sure people are fairly familiar with, as you drive in our countrysides these days, we're seeing an increasingly large spread of bush honeysuckle beneath the trees. And this is a time of the year when it becomes very obvious. You will see the leaves of the trees will have fallen, and yet you still have this green layer of shrubs underneath. And that's the bush honeysuckle. It's a non-native. It's a European or Eurasian plant that forms very dense undergrowth in our native woodlands. These are what I would call ecosystem disruptors. They dramatically change the structure of our historic forests and our second growth forests in the state. And they do compromise then the kinds of plants and animals that can thrive in those woodlands. I mentioned in my earlier time that the book Bringing Nature Home by Doug Ptolemy, and his work is showing that the numbers of bird species declines as you have the non-natives taking over. You may have not a big change in the total number of birds, or maybe even in some cases some increase in the number of birds, but you're losing the richness of birds. You're just having a few generalist species that thrive, and the broad cohort of birds actually diminishes. This is particularly true of those that are the insectivores, the ones that eat insects. The same work also shows that even those generalist species, while there may be holding their numbers or somewhat more numerous, that their nesting successes decline, and their nutrition is compromised by the poor quality of the fruit and foods that come from the non-native plants. And the bush honeysuckle, as I've described this time of year, you can see how it's inhibiting the growth of other plants underneath it. And this will compromise tree regeneration, and it will compromise then the spring wildflowers, for which this part of the world is absolutely famous. We have such a beautiful display of wildflowers in April and May. So that's my background. And then how big is the challenge? I've often thought if I could wave a magic wand and get rid of about a dozen invasive exotics in the state, how different everybody's job would be. We have had some successes, though, with coming up with with biological control agents to help us combat this problem. And so the one success I can point to is in controlling purple loosestrife, which has historically become a significant invader of our wetland communities in northern Indiana especially. But we very carefully tested several kinds of insects that were from the home territory of this particular plant. The Gallicello beetle is one that feeds on the vegetation. There's another insect that feeds on the roots, another feeds on the flowers. And they are doing a sufficient job to keep the impact of purple loosestrife in check in those places where these insects have been released, and they also these insects seem to be able to spread to other sites that have the purple loosestrife plant. One has to be very careful with this kind of work to make sure that you're not going to have an effect on non-target species. And the research that was done before the releases were allowed indicated that indeed we're not having unwanted impact in even other closely related plants to the purple loosestrife. So this is an excellent piece of work and good news for those of us who are concerned about spreading of invasive plants. But I can't say the same good news yet about things like bush honeysuckle and garlic mustard. And so this is an ongoing issue. You know, various kinds of cultural methods are used. So in the springtime, you may see opportunities to volunteer your services to help pull garlic mustard. Other times, you actually may need to treat some of these invasives with herbicides, and then you have this problem of how carefully can you apply those herbicides and how expensive it is to do that work. But at least that's the effort that's underway to try to manage these problems in our natural areas and our roadsides. John, I don't know if that kind of did you the service you needed, but that was some of my initial thoughts on that question.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's very helpful to me, at least. I'm learning a whole lot here tonight. But I'm wondering if Jane has been able to connect again and would like to ask a question herself personally.
Yes, Jane did have another question. She was asking about how goats could be used to combat invasive species.
I know goats, yes, they have been used. If you have an area that is overrun with invasives, I do recall seeing a news report where they would contain the goats in the area that was meeting the control. And so this can be a more natural way, aside from herbicides, to kind of get ahead of the exotics that are in that particular site. To my knowledge, that work is still fairly new. So how broadly applicable it will be, I cannot respond to, but it has been tried, and it seems to have some promise.
That's fascinating to me. I personally, as I'm hearing you are personally interested mostly if there are natural ways to control these native species without going to pesticides. I mean, herbicides.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can do that, I don't know. You mentioned about pulling the invasive mustard. Is this safe? Say, could you get kids out there and be somewhat assured that they are not going to get poisoned or hurt some way?
Well, there have been, say, a number of public events involving trying to weed areas of garlic mustard. It's pretty easy to recognize the plant. It's early enough that I think poison ivy kinds of things, I think that's what you're referring to, have not leafed out and become as problematic as they might be later in the season. Yeah, I've seen days where you have all age groups out performing this service. The bigger question is really the one of how effective it is. There are mixed reports on that. Certainly one needs to, if you're going to do it, you need to have this planned before the plants have begun to flower. Once they begin their flowering process, then if you pull it and don't properly dispose of the plant, the seeds will mature anyway and get stored up in the soil where they could germinate in future years. There's also some questions about whether in pulling the plants, then you're also disturbing other things that could also thrive in that site that you don't want to disturb. I guess to me, I would see this as a measure where you're trying to do a certain kind of targeted control, and maybe let professionals work on the other areas. But I think it's a good way to involve the public, educate the public, and as you do this careful saying, well, here are the targeted sites, they actually can be perform very useful services to the land managers.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I've got more questions, but I'm not wanting to. Hold the airtime here all to myself. So anybody else who's on the call now that has a question or a comment to make, particularly to Paul Rothrock, this is your opportunity. You can, if you're on the telephone, you can ask to speak directly, or if you are on your computer, you can write a memo in the chat box. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, Paul, I'm going to ask you something that you don't have to answer if you don't feel comfortable about it, because I know that you're speaking tonight as a scientist, also as a person of faith, and I'm wondering if you could reveal to us and to the audience listening your sense of concern and alarm about climate change and what the potential is doing to the quality of life for future generations.
Yes. Well, I do see it as a significant question that adds to the complexity of so many environmental issues. I know certainly within our society we have a very, well, we have an interesting split. The latest numbers that I see is that there's a rather small percent that are absolute climate change deniers. Then, and I'd say that's roughly 10%. There's about then 30% that they kind of don't really have much interest in it one way or the other, so they don't deny, they just are kind of very neutral. I think there's a third of the population that do believe that climate change is real, but haven't been moved to action. and then the remainder are both believing it is real and are moved to saying we need to act. So as someone who has studied nature and a great deal of concern over what's happening to our native ecosystems, I have to say I am very concerned. I've been following this for over 20 years, and the summary I would offer is, in following the issue, I certainly see science doing what science does, which is to keep carefully asking questions and gathering new data, and therefore refining the kinds of ideas that we have relative to climate change. However, I have not seen anything in those 20 years that has changed the thrust of the fundamental scientific conclusion that it's real. And as it's real, then it has impact on some very real things that affect us people across the country and around the world. Certainly, we have a concern about what happens to coastal communities, and that'd be a very human-focused concern, as well as, again, what natural systems are doing. We have concerns about how it changes our form of agriculture, what kinds of crops we would grow here in Indiana, or how we grow those crops, what kinds of forest management strategies we would use, as I mentioned earlier. In some parts of the country, this is going to have and is having impact on amount of soil moisture, changing the ease with which forest fires spread, but also it's having impacts on snowpack, and therefore the water supply systems of states in the west that rely upon snowmelt for the continuous flow of water during the warmer months of the year. So they'll have a lot of readjustments to make. And I suppose for me, I've been one who has signed on with other people of faith to say this is a social justice issue as well, that it unequally affects people who are less well off because they don't have the wherewithal to adapt to these changes as they occur elsewhere in the world. That idea of mitigating measures to respond to climate change has to happen worldwide, and the poor countries are the ones that are going to not be able to respond, and yet they may be disproportionately affected by the changes that are going to happen. So I see it as a local issue as well as a global issue, and I just see us needing to be responding to it sooner rather than later. I guess my final thought would be that the cost of responding, yes, there are costs. People will see changes, and there always are adjustments that happen in particular sectors of society and particular individuals' lives. But my understanding from the studies that I've seen is the society level, the national level, that we win as well as we have winning, we have things where we gain, as it were, as well as these costs. And in the end, it's we're doing the kinds of things that make us a more sustainable society, that prepare us for taking care of the earth for the longer term. And I think of these as being for the long-term good, the kinds of things that we would hope to do anyway. And so we're just trying to get people to move up the timetable and put our minds to it, and we'll get started on it now rather than waiting for some future date when it gets to be maybe too late.
John, I do have a couple of questions for Paul from attendees.
We have 4 minutes left. Go ahead.
Okay. Vicki Foltz from Fort Wayne has asked, what might be some larger ornamental grasses, native grasses, that she could plant as a screen? Her concern is that the soil in Fort Wayne is primarily clay.
Yes. Well, there are several prairie grasses that I think would do fine. These are tall grass species, big blue stem, and switchgrass are both very vigorous growers. I've seen switchgrass used as a seasonal hedge because it gets to be about 5 feet tall, and I think it could tolerate the heavier soils that she has up there in Fort Wayne. There are also shorter species, little blue stem and prairie dropseed, that I especially the little blue stem, I think could tolerate the soils in Fort Wayne. I'm not quite so sure about prairie dropseed. I would have her visit the INPAWS website to see some sources for purchase of these native plants.
Thank you. And we had a question from Charlotte Wolf. I believe Charlotte is in South Bend area. She has asked if you have any need for internship placements. She has opportunities for interns at their learning farm.
Well, I hope she'll drop me an email and we can circulate that opportunity among the students in our department. We have approximately 30 undergraduates in environmental science. Some are going to be looking for practicum and internship opportunities. So is my email information in the materials that are circulated?
I would be happy to add that with your permission.
Yes, that'd be fine.
Okay, great. And then I have one more question, and this one is actually my own. I'm a very big fan of worm composting, food scraps, yard waste, everything really. And it's my understanding that that helps amend the soil to be able to tolerate, different conditions. And I wonder how big of a part that could be in preparedness for climate change. If I can complete that, if it's not clear, if
yes,
more people
run that by me
to,
once more. I'm not sure I fully found your question just yet, but you're using worms and you want to know about the whether they have a beneficial impact on responding to climate change by virtue of allowing
resilience
yeah.
to drought and things of that nature. Does it help
certainly
with preparedness?
Right. Certainly, in the general context, when you can create a situation where you have an abundance of soil organisms, worms included, that allows. And here's where another place where native plants, if you have them in your landscape, they do have deep roots. The native plants have deep roots. As those roots die, they leave passageways through the soil where water can percolate in. And that's certainly one of the things we think of as a role of earthworms as well. They do create the channels and that good infiltration of water. So one of the things that's happening in terms of the long-term pattern is we're moving to where we have somewhat more rain, but it's coming increasingly in downpours or bursts of rain rather than a more prolonged rain. So in order to get the full advantage of that water to penetrate the soil, then one needs to have these soils that aerate freely, that have these root channels and channels left by soil insects or soil organisms. So yes, that's a part of the strategy. Curiously, though, I'd have to comment that, believe it or not, earthworms are not native to North America, and in some regions, especially in our boreal forests, they've had negative effects. So I'm thinking earthworms in terms of your yard, your garden, and saying they're not a universal good. But they are certainly in our gardens as a way to get those that aeration and water infiltration into your garden soil.
All right, then. I think we're going to acknowledge that our time is up. Paul, I want to thank you for your generous participation tonight. We've loaded a lot on you, and you've handled it all with great aplomb, as far as I can tell. And we are deeply grateful to you. I also want to say, consider our organization, the Sustainable Indiana 2016. as an ally to yourself and others like you who are on this call who are deeply concerned about our state and its landscape and native species and invasive species. And I would like to suggest that we're all a team on this, and we should be aware of each other and call on each other whenever we have opportunity. We also have a website, sustainableindiana2016.org, where we are featuring as many stories as we can about what we call climate solutions, and we're looking for more stories. So we'd love to hear more about what's going on around Taylor University. I know you've got some things there. I've been there before. I see you've got a wind charger out there.
Yes, we have a new science complex that is striving for platinum LEED certification, and I think we will know within the next 4 months or so whether we've achieved that goal or not.
Great, great. Well, congratulations to yourself and Taylor on that achievement. So I believe we're starting to connect dots around Indiana, all of us. I believe we're starting to feel like there's more hope when we are connected and we are somehow come together on these things. So thank you all for being on this webinar tonight. Those of you who are listening in, if you have any comments you want to share, why you have our contact information either on the website or on the materials you've received from Kathy Sipple. Thank you, Kathy, for setting this up. And good night, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.